Hi everyone, we are moving on to the beginning steps of our button down shirt. So hopefully you have cut everything out successfully. I've kind of just created a little miniature back of a bodice. I've made 2 yokes, so remember that when you guys are cutting this out, it'll call for a single yoke, but I'm requiring you to cut 2 yokes, so you're going to cut 2 of those. I also have cut my fronts. So you'll see that I have here my little miniature fronts, my other little miniature front, okay? One of the first things it's probably gonna ask you to do is it's probably gonna ask you to stay stitch. It may wait until you have your shoulder seams connected to your yoke or to your back. And then once these are stitched, once these are seamed, I'm just gonna fake it. Once these are seamed, then it may have you do a stay stitch all the way around, meeting in the center or working from the center and working your way out. But stay stitching is usually one of the first things. So they may have you do it individually right now. They may have you do stay stitching on the front's neckline and the back neckline. And remember, with stay stitching, it stays in the garment. It is a stitch that happens 1/8 of an inch inside of the stitching line. So for you guys, it would happen at 1/2 inch. It's usually directional, so you'll see arrows drawn. So you may be sewing in with your stay stitching towards the center front. And again, it's not at 5/8, it's gonna be at 1/2 inch or 1/8 of an inch inside of the stitching line. Same thing on the back piece. They're probably not having you stitch just one direction, but they're probably having you start on the corners and work your way in, or start in the middle and work your way out. And again, that happens at 1/2 inch. So please don't forget to stay stitch. If you need reiteration on that, I can go ahead and link a page on stay stitching. So just let me know, email me and let me know that you want that. Okay, so once you stay stitch, one of the next things it's gonna have you do is it's gonna have you attach your pocket. Now, there is a whole section on patch pockets. It's a image tutorial that tells you exactly how to do everything from a square pocket to a rounded pocket. So make sure that you're attaching your pockets first and foremost. So one of the first things you're gonna do is you're gonna do your stay stitching. One of the second things that you're gonna do, or one of your, things at the beginning of the project, is going to be attaching your pocket. Now the reason why we attach the pocket early on is because it's easier to attach your pocket when your piece is open and flat. Once it gets connected at the shoulders and the sides and there's a sleeve, it then becomes a lot more difficult to place the pocket. So again, please make sure that you are abiding by the steps and you're moving onto your pocket. Make sure to watch the pocket module on the pocket page so that you can see all the different ways to complete that. Right now what we're focusing on is focusing on the double yoke, the connection of the yoke to the back, and then what I call the burrito method because it requires some folding. Now your pattern may have you do it this way, it may not. So I'm going to set my front pieces aside for now. So I'm just going to set those over here. I'm going to bring out my yoke. I'm going to bring out one of my yokes. And this one kind of has some of my markings on it from when I just kind of sketched it out. So I'm going to call this my inside or my lining because it's not that pretty. So I'm going to call that one my lining. And I'm going to call the prettier one my outside. This is the right side of my fabric. What I have here is I have that back yoke with a neckline for the back, my shoulders for the back, and then these are part of the armholes. Now, the rest of the back is a separate piece that's cut, and you can kind of see I've kind of like crunched this up to make them fit. You'll see that the armholes get continued down. The armholes get continued down because this is the shoulder area and that's where the yoke gets connected. A yoke is, again, you can think of it like a yoke that goes on cattle when they're oxen, when they pull the wagon. It's like the weight that sits on the shoulder. And so that's why this thing is called the yoke too. It sits on your shoulder and bears a little more weight, and hence why we line it, because we want it to have some structure. So what you'll see that I'm doing with my hands here is I'm taking it and I'm kind of crunching it up. You may have a pleat in your back, and so I've gone ahead and I've patterned this little shirt to have a pleat. And so what you're gonna do is you're gonna look for your solid and your dotted lines, and you're gonna listen to the instructions on your pattern. It's going to tell you to connect solid to dotted or dotted to solid, and then it's going to say stitch in place. So I have here a center line because I'm doing an inverted box pleat, and I have my solid lines are my purple and my dotted lines are my blue. So hopefully you can see those two different colors there. And what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna take my solid and I'm gonna connect it to my solid, so my purple to my purple, so that I can create this box pleat. And it really just depends on what your instructions say. So I'm just doing purple. I just kind of color coded mine so that my purples all connect and that my dotted lines sit in the background on that folded area. And so I'm creating an inverted box pleat. You might have the opposite where they tell you to create a box pleat where it goes inwards. And it really just depends on your project and your design. So no matter how you splice it, this is my box pleat here, or for mine, I'm doing an inverted box pleat. That's just the way that I have patterned these pleats. I feel that, I don't know, for like a women's blouse, I kind of like it when it goes inwards a little bit more instead of sticking out and giving it kind of like a little bulge. But again, I just patterned this little thing by hand, so it's really whatever you want. So you'll see that, once you line it up and once you do the pleats correctly, you'll see that now, instead of being way too big, it's now the right size. So once you get your pleat pinned, so I'm gonna go ahead and do that right now. So I'm taking purple to purple, the way that I've kind of patterned it out, and my dotted or my blue marking is on the back of the fold. I'm gonna pin that down. I'm gonna do the same thing on the other side. I'm gonna do purple to purple so they meet in the middle, and I make sure that they're perfectly flush and that my blue is on the inside along the fold inside of the shirt. And I'm gonna pin that down. Okay, and then what you can do is you could take this to the iron right now and give it a little press. I like to make sure that my entire length of my pleat is folded correctly before I go to press anything. You're not gonna be pressing for all the way from the top of the shirt back to the hemline, but I like to prepare it so that way I'm not creating any unnecessary or incorrect creases. So again, I'm not going to actually press this entire thing down. I'm not going to take this and press it down from the seam down to the hem, but I just want to get it folded, and you can pin it here if you want, or I'm just going to hold mine in place and I'm going to give it a nice press real fast, just because again I just want to make sure that I solidify this pleat area. Now I have glass head pins right now. If you don't have glass head pins, please don't iron over your pin heads, just because they will melt. And so that's again why I suggest using glass heads, because we're going to do a lot of what I just did, where you're going to have things pinned and you're going to press. So just again, if you have glass head, go ahead and press onto it. If not, please don't. Okay, now we're going to move on to connecting the yoke. So I'm going to take, again, I have two yokes here. I have a not so pretty one and then I have a pretty one. I'm going to take my pretty one and I want to connect it here. Well, I can start connecting it already. But one thing that your pattern is going to ask you to do is it's going to ask you to baste your pleat. So what that means is they just want you to come across and at a stitch that's not going to show. So I'm going to do 1/2 inch. At 1/2 inch, I'm going to baste this pleat down so it doesn't move. So I'm going to go ahead and do that fairly quickly. And then hopefully, you know, you guys remember. I'm just going to see if I can get you guys to see at least my stitch. Just for now. Hopefully you remember that basting, you take it to a 5 length and it's temporary. We'll remove it shortly. Nice wide stitch. Again, this is just a temporary thing, just so that I can kind of attach my yoke really easily and I don't have to worry about it flopping around. Okay, that's it. Go ahead and bring this back down. Huh? Not yet. Not yet. You're fine. Okay, so now I have a little, you know, it's a little bit easier for me to work with here now that I've basted it and I don't have pins stuck inside. So I'm going to leave those a little long because I'm going to pull them out eventually. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the pretty side of my yoke and I'm going to line it up to the pretty side of my back. Now I have stripes, and some of you guys decided that you were going to go with a plaid or a stripe for the project. So I've also attached a module or a page into the module about matching plaids and stripes. There are certain areas that you absolutely need to match, and then there are certain areas where you don't necessarily have to, and you could choose to cut on the bias instead. So the yoke would be an area where if you wanted to cut it on the bias, you could. It doesn't absolutely need to match. If you didn't want to cut it on the bias, you could match them, but I will tell you right now that the entire yoke will not match. Only a portion of it will. So you'll see on mine, some of these stripes match, but not all of them can. And the reason for that is because you may have a pleat like this. Again, mine's an inverted pleat, so it's a box pleat out here right now. Because of this pleat, everything gets shifted. So again, some of your yoke may match your back, but not all of it, and that's okay if that's the case. So what I'm doing is I am attempting to match some of my pleats here. And again, the ones in the middle, it's just not gonna happen. So you just have to make do. Okay. Okay, so I'm gonna kind of lift this up so you can kind of see, but you can see how this is gonna connect. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna get ready for the lined yoke. So what that means is that instead of going, oh, that's what Mommy's gonna keep now. You can take this. What I'm gonna do, can I see what else you have real fast? Sorry guys, I just wanna make sure that's all good. Nothing sharp. Yep, that's fine. I just wanna make sure she didn't take anything pokey. Okay, so I'm gonna get ready for my lined yoke. So instead of going and stitching this together, I'm gonna kill a couple of birds with the same stone. I'm gonna grab my yoke lining, the one that doesn't look super good, the one that's kind of a little messed up, and I'm gonna put it pretty sides up. So looking at the pretty side, so the pretty side is here. And then I'm gonna take the wrong side, the incorrect side of the back piece, and I'm gonna set it on top. So essentially what I'm doing is I'm pretending like I'm putting the pretty sides of the yokes together. So if I could just get rid of, if I could hide and I could just erase this shirt back right here, if I could just get rid of that shirt back and I could connect the yokes right now, they would be sitting pretty sides together. So that's what I want you to do. I want you to take the yokes and I want you to put them pretty sides together, and I want you to line up the seam, and I want you to take those pins and repin them all the way through. So all 3 layers. Okay, this is how we're gonna start our lining. Okay. Again, we want this area to be sturdy. We want it to have some structure. It's holding the weight of our shoulders, so it's holding pretty much the weight of the entire shirt. And we're lining it so that it looks really good, not only from the outside, but also from the inside. So I don't know if you guys heard this in beginning sewing or not, or if you've heard this throughout your sewing classes, but there's something called hanger appeal. And what hanger appeal is when you take a garment and you hang it on a hanger, so you're not wearing it, but you're hanging it on a hanger, you can see through. So as you hang a shirt on a hanger and you pull it over the front, you can see inside of the neckline, so you can see to the back of the shirt. When you have an unlined yoke, you can see kind of like the raw edge of the neck. You can see maybe the seams here, maybe the seam that goes across the yoke. Maybe it's got a serge on it, so it doesn't look bad, but it doesn't look great. And so we want to try to give this the most beautiful hanger appeal we can. So we're gonna line that yoke for that reason. So, okay, so we're gonna line it, and it's a really simple process. So now I'm gonna go ahead and I am gonna stitch this. So I'm gonna make sure that my stitch length is at 2.5, because this is gonna stay put. This is gonna be a real stitch. So I'm gonna take this back down to a 2.5. Okay, and I'm gonna stitch these together all at the same time. Jack, will you help Abby and just stand at the door here? Thank you, sir. Okay. So I'm going to go ahead and stitch this together. And I'm doing 5/8, even though mine's a little teeny tiny sample, but I'm just doing 5/8 because it'll make it easier for you guys when you guys are watching this and moving on to your own projects. So although mine's a little teeny sample, 5/8. Oh, then I turned my stitch way down. 2.5, sorry, I turned mine down to 2. So 2.5. That's a regular stitch length. Make sure to back stitch at the beginning and end of everything that's gonna be stitched or seamed. One of the things you don't have to back stitch on that's gonna be a regular stitch length is gonna be your stay stitch. So again, if you want a review on stay stitching, let me know. Stay stitching, although it stays and it's a regular stitch length, you actually don't back stitch on it because it's unnecessary. So that's just the one thing to remember. Let me know if you want the page added to the module. But this is a seam, and all seams are back stitch if they're regular. So I am going to back stitch at the beginning and the end. I'll pull this out. I'm gonna cut this really short because I don't need it anymore. And then I'm gonna go ahead and rotate this back down. Sorry about that. So you guys can kind of see what's going on. So now, if I open this up, I now have, and like it said, it'll match up for a while, but then once you get in here, it's not going to, and there's nothing you can do about that. So again, I've created an inverted box pleat for mine, so I have now my yoke attached. And then if I go ahead and pull my lining up and I flip it to the inside, I have a yoke on the inside too, and it looks awesome. So it's looking really, really pretty and really clean, and that's what we want. Notice that it's a little bit bulky though, okay, and that's okay, that's normal. So I'm just gonna bring my iron into frame, and I'm gonna press these open because the first thing we do after we stitch is we press. Do not forget that. Always, always, always pressing. And I'm gonna press the yoke lining first, and now I'm going to press the yoke itself away from the shirt itself. Okay, give that a nice hard press, give it some steam. Again, really trying to open this up. I can see now that I'm in here, I can see those basted rows that I can feel free to remove now because I've done a permanent stitch, so I'm gonna get rid of those if I can. I'm gonna use a little pin real fast just to kind of get those out of the way. You don't need to use a seam ripper with these, it's just a little easier if I just loosen them with a pin, and then I can pull on that. Usually leaving them a little bit longer is a little more helpful. There should be a pink one in here that I'm gonna take out now. Okay. So from the inside looks great. From the outside looks really good. Okay, but there is one thing that I need to do to make it look even better, and that's the trimming, grading, and clipping process. But really for this, all we need to do is we need to trim and we need to grade. So I'm gonna come in here and I'm gonna trim off a little bit of everything. So I'm gonna trim off a little bit of all layers, and when I say a little bit, I mean 1/8 of an inch off of all layers. And then I'm also going to grade down my back, so the one with the yoke. I'm gonna grade that one down an additional 1/8 of an inch. So I should have about 1/4 of an inch of a seam allowance left in the middle. The reason why I'm grading this one down more is because it has the bulk of the pleat, and so I wanna make sure to get rid of that so that when I come from the outside, so let's show you the outside now that I've trimmed, now you can see that, oh, it's a lot thinner. And if I take my iron, and again, I'm just gonna bring it into frame, use your ironing board, but I'm just trying to do it so that you guys can see everything that's happening. You can see now, much, much smoother, not as bulky. Okay, now we're gonna move on to the next step of the lining.